All right, cheers, everyone. Welcome to the Water Cooler. The Water Cooler is a show about marketing, sales, and technology. Each episode, we focus on bringing advice that works. I have Jess Lenouvel, who was an active real estate agent for 13 years, who's built a multiple seven-figure business and sold $300 million in real estate alone. She's got an incredible pedigree. I can't wait to dive into questions with her today. She runs a company called Listing Labs. She helps agents across the U.S., Canada, Australia, implement life-changing strategies for their business, giving them growth, predictability, which is incredibly difficult in real estate, and finally, peace of mind. Jess, welcome to the Water Cooler.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, our audience is absolutely looking for ways to create predictability in their business. And we're going to get into this in a little bit, Jess, in terms of talking about the ways in which you coach your clients and your community on how to create that for their businesses. But I want to start by asking a very simple question, which is, when you look at the landscape of realtors out there are realtors that I would consider to be sort of completely inept, who really have no business being in our industry. But then you have a certain percentage that are actually really good people who care deeply about the work that they do, who have to carry the burden and the cross of sort of the bad rep that we have in our space. Why do good, talented, and experienced agents fail in this business?
I think because in real estate, you really have two jobs. You have the job of selling real estate, working with clients, building relationships. But then you also have this other job that is lead generation and bringing business in. And a lot of the time, those really awesome people who are really fantastic at their jobs, they don't want to feel salesy, for one. And on top of it, they're not marketers.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time what happens is these amazing people who have the ability to impact hundreds of lives every year, they're not getting in front of the same number of people, and they're being taught over and over again, just work your sphere of influence. Just keep asking people for referrals. And so what happens over time, they exhaust that sphere, and then their business tends to just kind of go stagnant, or it doesn't grow, or they decide that it's not right for them.
Yeah, I hear the HubSpot has some data on this, Jess, where they said the attrition rate of your database is about 18% annually. So to your point, if you establish a sphere, even if it is 300, 400, 500 people with a certain percentage turning over, there's going to be natural sort of like attrition in that list. And what you're saying is fundamentally, in order for someone who is already good at what they do to be successful in this business, they've got to be prepared to be good at the other job in real estate, which is actually not the job of selling houses or helping people find homes.
Exactly. It's the generating new business side of things.
Well, where do they like? So I'm listening to this podcast right now. I'm all in on it. Right, our audience is pretty sophisticated. They kind of understand that concept. Where do they get hung up? Because I know, as someone who's been in the marketing space for a long time, I just even posted this in our own private mastermind group. There is still, to this day, so much complexity with effectively running, well-designed marketing campaigns. Where do you see agents really struggling to sort of make that connection? Because from my perspective, I can kind of put my head in the sand for 6 months. I can come up and see what's new because I have this foundation of knowledge I'm built on top of. Where do you see them struggling? So they love the idea, but where do they find themselves kind of like tripping up on execution?
I would say a couple of places. So information overload, I think, is a problem. I think that there's a lot of people who will go out and listen to every podcast, read every freebie out there, and never actually learn anything, right? And then you also have those people who fundamentally they understand all of it, but it's an implementation problem.
Sure.
Right. So they're constantly bringing in new information. They're learning, but they're not implementing.
Yeah.
I think it's also time.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think that the hardest part is the fact that in order to build out a really great, really functional marketing system, it has to be set up in the first place.
Yeah.
And that takes time. And a lot of the time, and I use the concept of the hamster wheel all the time. So, a lot of these agents, they're on this hamster wheel, they're serving their clients. A lot of them are still probably prospecting and nurturing their past database over and over and over again. They're doing it manually. And so carving out that time to create automation, to create that kind of marketing system that's going to feed them in the future it keeps getting put on the back burner, I think I would say.
How does one, given sort of the nature of the world that we live in, where we have to constantly be, because the job of a real estate agent, a realtor, I have a tremendous amount of empathy for it, because I think some of the problems we have are self-inflicted wounds, meaning
100%.
making ourselves accessible to our clients 24/7. Like, that is a myth. It's unrealistic. It's unsustainable. But the second part is, there is a certain level of unpredictability that exists within the business that prevents people who want to have structure to be able to build that structure. So is this something that an individual needs to, out of the gates, either like stop selling, stop marketing to build? Do they have to take a step back from a running business, or can you build the rocket ship in mid-flight here?
I'm a really big believer I'm a really big believer that you can kind of jump and build the plane on the way down.
Mm,
Right. And I also don't think that it needs to take a tremendous amount of time. I think the time factor becomes overwhelming for people because people feel like they need to do it in 2 days.
yeah,
If you carve out an hour a day, which everybody has, there's no agent out there that can tell me that they're not watching a little bit of TV.
sure.
Right? So you carve out an hour a day, 5 days a week for 2 months, 2.5 months, you can
Hmm.
get everything built out. You can get your entire marketing system built out, automated. You can learn everything that you need to know.
Hmm.
It's just a matter of carving out that time and being accountable to yourself to actually get the system up and running.
Yeah. One characteristic I've learned working with and interviewing successful people is the commonality amongst them is not a single one of them complains, successful people that is, complains about not having enough time. It's actually something that unsuccessful or people who are struggling actually talk a lot about is not having enough time. Successful people never complain about not having enough time because they realize they are in complete control of the environment they created for themselves.
Yeah.
At what point does the real estate business become at what point do you make that transition from like a volume perspective, from a growth perspective? I know for our business, we got nearly 60 employees here that work for Curator, and I can look back at our history and say, okay, when we hit like 20 employees, like things began to really change. When we hit, well, for first off, when we had like our first 5 employees, things got really complicated, really difficult. And then 20 was like, okay, things are just different. At 45, 50, it was like, holy shit, we are really not prepared for this in a lot of ways. Where is those kind of breaks for an agent and for a realtor? Like, where are those sort of key moments where what got you there is not going to get you to that next level?
So here's and I'm going to answer your question, but I'm also going to answer it in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of people out there that, and I think this comes from, and don't get me wrong, love the company, but I think that this comes from an old school Keller Williams model
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of the time people are hiring before they're automating.
Mm.
So there's a lot of things that people are hiring that they're like, oh, the first thing I need to do once I get busy is I need to hire an assistant. Instead of looking at their day-to-day tasks and saying, okay, in this order, and this is a Tim Ferriss kind of order of doing things.
Yeah.
Can this be eliminated?
Mm-hmm.
Can this be automated? Can this be outsourced? The outsourcing really should be the last thing on the list.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, because a lot of agents will hire before they look at technology and they look at elimination and they look at efficiencies,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, they hire too early. So then what happens is they end up with this assistant that they're babysitting
Mm.
because they're handing off things that really at the end of the day, the assistant's probably not really all that capable of doing as well as they can.
Yeah.
And I'm really a believer too that when you hire, it doesn't matter how many people you hire. It really becomes about hiring the right people and putting the right people in the right roles.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've done the same thing. I've grown small teams and gotten them to a point where I felt like I was going to die
Mm-hmm.
because all I was doing, like I was essentially the assistant to my team,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then
Sure.
and then you back it up, you get rid of everybody, and then you do it the right way.
Yeah.
And the right way is that the team supports you and not the other way around.
Well, it's a profound idea that's really simply and beautifully stated, Jess, because I think that many people who are watching right now, if we were being honest with ourselves, we would say, I am I am working for the people that actually I employ or that I serve, and it's not the other way around. Now, obviously, if you're fans of Simon Sinek and you're fans of the people that we coach here at the Water Cooler, like Herb Kelleher, of course you should be, of service to your team. But that's not what Jess is saying. What Jess is saying, what I'm hearing at least, Jess, is that at a certain point, if you're having to babysit, micromanage, clean up the work, one of two things are probably true. First, either you're a bad manager and you should look internally, or second, you hire the wrong person. Now, I think a lot of people skip to number 2, Jess, before they go to number 1. What do you think about, so going back to my original question though, when you think about a traditional real estate business, I know the first couple $100,000 in revenue is like, by whatever means necessary, let's get there. Forget about digital, forget about online, like whatever I got to do to kind of get this thing rolling, roll up my sleeves, make it happen. So what changes for a real estate business once they kind of get that at least initial bit of success? Like what changes at that like $250,000, $300,000 mark?
So that's where you hit your bandwidth, like kind of your bandwidth limit. And you get to a point where you physically don't have more time.
Yeah.
And you don't have any more room in your life without compromising the things that you got into the business for in the first place, which was the ability to have a little bit more freedom.
Yeah.
And at that point, it becomes time for money.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, yes, then you need to start leverage. And leveraging can happen obviously in a couple of different ways. But in my opinion, the things that are the most inefficient, the things that can be automated are the things that have to happen first. And in, the first thing that I always look at is going to be, back-end systems. And it's going to be lead gen.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're looking basically saying the things that we know to a large degree can be sort of set up once and then maintain, but still produce sort of, compounding results are what you need to focus on. Who is Jess hiring for her first hire? Because I hear this obviously from my side of things. I hear your admin should be your first hire. An assistant should be your first hire. I read something in one of your papers that you wrote that I thought was probably the first time I've heard someone describe it this way, where you said, and then maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, maybe this wasn't the first hire, but you said a real estate team, a broker, a team, an agent who wants to grow needs to hire a project manager. And that was one of the things that kind of just jumped out at me, because that's a term that we use in technology. Yeah. You have project managers in technology companies like Curator. You don't hear that in real estate. You hear assistant, admin, right? Transaction coordinator. Describe to our audience what you mean by project manager.
So the reason why I came up with it this way is because I grew up with a mom who is a phenomenal realtor, takes beautiful care of her clients. And so my mom's been a realtor for 35 years. You put a piece of paperwork in front of her and it's going to end up on the floor of the back seat of the car. And, things like that. So the way that I've always looked at it is look outside the industry. Yeah. Look at what works in other industries and bring it back to real estate, because real estate is a very old school industry. And I don't know if you've ever read the book Rocket Fuel. So Rocket Fuel is a fantastic book where it talks about visionary and integrator. And most people who do have that initial success, who belong in this industry, those people who are dynamic and magnetizing and good at the actual customer service side of the real estate business, they're more classified as like a visionary. The visionary always needs an integrator, someone who's going to manage that person. Yeah. The visionary is going to be the person who goes out there and makes connections and builds relationships and all of that. But that's not the person who's going to run the back end of the business. Yeah. And if the back end of the business is going to scale, it's more than just paperwork and administration.
Yeah, I'm just imagining myself going around the office now and referring to myself as the visionary and seeing what people's reaction to that's going to be. No, but you're absolutely right. There is a certain, there is that someone out there leading the pack who's trying new things, who's trying to innovate. At the exact same time, there needs to be something behind the scenes that is helping kind of systematize what you're describing. And what I've run into my experience, Jess, is that those two parts of the business need to be working in concert together. Otherwise, what you find is the operation side is kind of always not knowing what's happening next and cleaning up the mess that goes along with it. When you think about scale for a moment, because again, we're talking about this moment, I want to get in the head of a realtor who's at this point. You talked about automating some of the systems. You talked about sort of delegating some things that need to be delegated. You talked about eliminating some things that just simply are not necessary to do. And you talked about outsourcing. what begins when you begin to scale? So let's say I start to, and we're going to talk into lead generation a little bit later on today in the
Yep.
podcast. But when you think about what are the unexpected things that begin to break at scale for a realtor, what are the things that you think about like that? They're obvious to those who have gone through it, but when you're starting the process and you're like, oh, I'm just going to double my business by doubling my production. What are those parts of the business that you're like, I didn't expect this thing to break, and it's causing me to basically have a bottleneck?
It's funny. It's the simple things. It's phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
It's email. It's responses and client communication.
Mm.
Because and you touched on this earlier in terms of like real estate agents don't have any boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first thing that when you start to scale has to be really solid.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have standard operating procedures for every situation. It can't be fly by the seat of your pants and just, do and wing it.
Yeah.
Because really, once you get to that level of scale, you're still obviously in customer service, but your job you become a problem solver.
Yeah.
That's really all you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You're fixing things that are breaking, whether it's in a deal, whether it's with a client who's happy or unhappy or whatever, and it's within the back end of your business as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the things that tend to break are the human element, and I've had that experience where I scaled too quickly. At one point didn't have the infrastructure in place behind me,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember one night my phone rang. It was probably 10:30. Nothing wrong with this person. I'd never set any proper expectations for this person not to call me at 10:30.
Yeah.
Burst into tears, handed my husband my phone and said, "You have to answer this. Everybody just wants me all the time."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's burnout.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say it's the human element that will break before everything else.
Yeah, the mental health stigma that used to exist in the business world has sort of faded into the background, and now a lot of people are starting to appreciate that you being mentally prepared to be successful in business. And you have an expression that I love, which is and I'm going to butcher it, but you talked about like people are not prepared for success. People are always like prepared for failure. We'll talk about that in a minute. But like, I think what happens in a lot of cases is that you start to have this sort of scarcity mindset when you start to get a little bit of momentum, a little bit of success. You're like, you just don't want to lose it. So you just try everything in your power to sort of, maintain it, and it's unsustainable and it takes a mental toll on your business. Now, I want to be clear for our audience. I certainly do not have this figured out. I've said this before on the water cooler, but when it comes to work-life balance, I am not the guru, right? Like my wife knows this already. Like I work an insane amount of hours, but that is because I haven't figured out a better way yet. And maybe I'm not smart enough, maybe I'm not talented enough, but like the just sheer will is kind of getting me to where I'm at today. Like I haven't figured out a better way quite yet. But what you said about breaking at scale, about that human element, is there advice you have as it relates to like preventing that? Because I actually think I know it's not like typical water cooler marketing sales technology, but I think it's such an interesting topic anyways, Jess, where it's like, what can one do in this industry to prevent themselves from burning out every single month, every single quarter, whether they're a high or low? How do they sort of set themselves up for success in this space? Because I feel like that's kind of the whole ball game in real estate, is a mental game.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. And I think that the one mindset shift that has to happen in order to protect yourself, but also to scale, is stop looking at how much does it cost and start looking at what's the ROI. And I think that that's something that a lot of people forget, is they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so focused on the initial cost of what this is going to take out of my pocket.
Yeah.
Without looking at the long-term effects of having that time back, being able to actually manage yourself.
Sure.
But then also it's even things like hiring, leverage, technology, all of that stuff is necessary for you to be able to maintain yourself for a long period of time. You're not in this business for 2 years. The whole point of it is that you're in this business for 10 years or 20 years or whatever that looks like. And a lot of the time that kind of that ceiling that people hit is it's a mental ability to put out money.
Yeah.
And so instead of people, I think because it's scarcity and it's kind of fear of, well, what if it doesn't pay off? What if I spend money and I don't make it back? Or what if I hire the wrong person? It's always fear-based.
Welcome to business.
Welcome to business, right?
Yeah, that's like
all it is risk reward, right?
Sure. You remind me of Jeff Bezos in the sense where what you're saying is accept the fact that you're going to be in this industry for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and make bets that are going to be relevant later on. I remember Jeff Bezos once said this, like they make investments in strategic sort of decisions based on where they think the world's going to be 5 years from now. That what's still going to be relevant. Point in case would be something like they know that convenience, meaning people's desire to get things they buy online faster and reliably, is going to be more important, or at least as important as it is today as it will be 5 years from now. So therefore they invest heavily in like the infrastructure and the delivery, and that's why they do the last mile stuff now where they're actually delivering to your house because they want to control the entire end-to-end experience. So they make massive investments in the areas of the business that don't change, that will be relevant. And that's what I'm hearing you say is like, if someone can accept the fact that you need to make an investment and you can sort of pick the right horses, then that's maybe the first mind shift kind of change that needs to happen for someone to kind of get out of that vicious cycle of like scarcity and kind of going broke every 3 months.
Well, for sure. And I think that what happens a lot of the time is you get into this habit, and I've done it too. You get into this habit of, oh, well, you know what? I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. That only takes 5 minutes. That only takes 5 minutes. That only takes 5 minutes. And then you get to a point where you're like, I'm doing everything.
Yeah.
And how much is my time really worth? And that's why we end up with all of these agents that are spending 8 hours a day doing $15 an hour tasks instead of outsourcing them with, like, you can hire a virtual assistant to do most of that stuff for not very much.
Yeah.
But it's almost like a value misalignment. Like, what do you value more? Do you value your money or do you value your time?
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually, it reminds me of my brother Joey, who works here for Curator. He will go to any extent to like save money when he travels. He'll like take like super cheap flights that are like wildly inconvenient. At one point, he's like, I would take a bus to South Carolina because it's less expensive. And I told him that, well, if there's a bus to South Carolina, I'll pay for it. And it turns out there was one, and he backed out the last minute. It was like $20 to go to South Carolina as opposed to flying like every other normal human being on the planet. But what I want to get into right now for our audience, because I think the point you made about like what do you value is so important. How does someone, let's say you're watching this podcast or you're listening to this podcast or you're watching it live on Facebook, let's say you are that person where you are your mom, Jess, where you are a talented, hardworking, deeply empathetic, expert in what you do. How do you train and set up that kind of project manager person for success? Because I find in my experience that even if you hire the person, if you don't properly onboard them and set them, like it's going to end up like you're going to burn through these people. And you're like, well, I got to find the right person. Well, you probably found the right person 3 hires ago, but you personally are unwilling to change to kind of get the most out of them. So how do you coach your clients and your community on taking someone like a visionary, as you described earlier, and getting them to actually find help that will benefit the business? How do they onboard them? How do they train them? How do they make them to integrate them into the business?
Okay, so there's a couple of things that I think are important. One of them is, and I know that the real estate industry loves their disc profiles. I'm actually not a huge disc lover. I really like the Colby. So the first thing I would do is have somebody take a Colby test. Because Kolbe, Kolbe, it's really beneficial in figuring out. Most visionaries will be very high on a quick start and very low on an integration or on a follow through. You want someone who's the opposite, someone who is systematic and slow moving and will frustrate you in the beginning.
Yeah.
Will move too slow for you, but that's actually what you need. And then from there, you have to have very clear culture, vision. You don't even have to have systems built out because that person can build out the systems. But the actual, like, what is the mission and vision of this business, of yourself, and be able to articulate that and make sure that you're hiring in accordance with it. But that on top of that, that you have such heavy buy-in from every single person who you bring on, that they're on the same page. If they're just there to collect a paycheck, then they're going to come in, they're going to go out. I've done the same thing. I've hired people and brought them in to run the back end of my business before. This was early. I was in my 20s. I was burnt out. I had way too much on my plate because I was trying to do everything. And I hired this one person who at the time, Top Producer was the big CRM that everybody was loving.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought this person on who was supposed to be a top producer expert. And she did the bare minimum because she wasn't bought in. She was older than I was. She didn't respect me. I was 25. She's like, why am I working? I'm working for this 25-year-old.
Yeah.
It was the wrong hire, but I also didn't do a good job at bringing her into the business
Mm-hmm.
and having having that buy-in from her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's also part of your role as a team leader, as a visionary, as a business owner, is to make sure that it's not just about the numbers. It's not about the transactions. It's not about anything else. You have to make it very clear what your business stands for. And there has to be genuine buy-in from everybody on your team.
And when you think about this, what I'm hearing you say is, we talk about buying. It sounds like even if you are a visionary in the context where you are out there, you are charismatic, you are talented, people love you, and that's to a large degree because real estate is a relationship business. It is sort of what helps sell, you over your competition.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm hearing you say to a certain degree is that you may not have to be the one who's implementing the actual X's and O's, but you better understand what you believe in and what you stand for if you're going to be able to attract people who are going to implement the X's and O's. That's something that like I think it's important for our audience to understand this. It's not okay to keep doing what you're doing and not sort of add in this last little bit here. Is what you're saying. Like you've got to you can be charismatic, but you better be able to communicate the values of your organization and what you believe in, so the people around you can actually properly support you.
Exactly. And I think there's also this misconception, and it comes from an ego place. I've been there too,
Mm-hmm.
where no one else can do what I do for my clients.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that is systematically false.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So anything can be systematized.
Mm-hmm.
Anything can be systematized if your standard operating procedures are geared towards the highest level of experience, the most valuable experience for your client. Even that can be systematized.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's and guys, if you're watching on the live stream right now, do us a favor, like this live stream, share this podcast. I'm getting tremendous value out of it. I think Jess is an absolute rock star. Listening to her in this interview, but also reading her material prior to today's show. It's always fun to find a kind of a kindred spirit who's out there trying to promote growing your business the right way. And I'm certainly learning a lot through this experience. I've already written down Colby Test I've never heard of. I haven't read the book Rocket Fuel, so I'm certainly going to check that out after today's show. I want to get in the mind of, if you were going to build a real estate team today, you mentioned sort of the traditional ways in which they build, which is, I've seen this time and time again with the customers that we work with. Curator, we help listing agents get more listings. And inevitably what happens is we see listing agents hire a bunch of buyer's agents and keep hiring a bunch of buyer's agents and keep hiring a bunch and then all of a sudden they have a 15, 17, 20 person team and their profitability just plummets.
Yeah.
So if you are going, and this is the old tale that we all know, if you are going to build a successful real estate team from the ground up, how does Jess actually do that? What is the way to build a massively profitable team? Assuming you get the systems in place, you get the lead gen, who are the people on the bus right now, Jess?
So I'm actually not of the mind of, and I know, and I know that they're the team leader is eventually always just going to be listing focused. Mm-hmm. But I also think that the team underneath you should be listing agents and buyer agents. Mm-hmm. I think that the relationship is important. People don't want to feel like a product, and people don't want to be passed around from person to person. Yeah. Right. And a lot of the time what ends up happening is those buyer agents in the marketplace are seen as less valuable and they're seen as less qualified. Mm-hmm. If the relationship is built on the listing side or the buy side or whatever that side is that they start with, that same person should be working with them all the way through that transaction. Yeah. Especially if they're doing two ends. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of something that I do slightly differently. So each client goes to a specific person as opposed to depending on where they are, what kind of a transaction they're doing. Sure.
So you don't delineate between buyers only, sellers only. You say, okay, this is customer only, customer first. Put in the customer's experience at the beginning of the or the center of the transaction, which makes a lot of sense. his name's going to escape me, but there's a gentleman who writes about customer churn, which is a big topic in the SaaS space, which is how many people turn over every single month on your product. And he talks about this concept of like the effect of the handoff that happens in the so from marketing to sales to onboarding to service. If the more times the individual is handed off, the more information is lost in translation. And as a result, the customer's frustration begins to sort of rise in parallel with the amount of times they're passed around. So you believe in the model, like once you get a customer, they're a customer, you got to treat them, whatever their needs are, you're going to be able to service them is the point.
Yeah.
Okay. So you got kind of a hybrid model. Who else is on the team, Jess? You got the team lead, right? The charismatic visionary. You got a couple sort of, people can play offense and defense, right? And then who's next?
Your project manager.
Okay.
Yeah, your project manager. That person could be anything from just basically basic operations.
Yep.
Right. So anything on the back end to free that team lead up to do the things that are going to actually generate business. Yeah. Create content in today's world. Get on video, get out there, talk to PR, get some PR, which is something that, is so important. Earned media is so important.
Talk about that for 1 second, because our audience may not know what you mean by earned media.
Okay. So we categorize media into 4 different media types. You've got your shared media, which is going to be things like social media. You've got your paid media, which is going to be your paid traffic. You've got earned media, which is your PR. So media attention, podcasts, things like that you're going on. And those things are so important. Because basically what you're, and then you also have like earned media can also be case studies and testimonials and things like that.
Yeah.
Right. But those are going to be from people are skeptical nowadays, even of case studies and testimonials and reviews. Right. Earned media basically says, here is an outside source who has come to me, sees me as, hey, that's why I'm here. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Like someone reaches out to you and says, hey, you know what? I think that what you're doing is great. And I think that you know what you're doing and you know what you're talking about. There's nothing better for authority building than that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's actually, I'm a masterclass nut. I watch all the master classes, and I was listening to David Axelrod and Carl Rowe, and they're doing the political one. And David Axelrod, the former campaign manager, I think chief of staff for Obama, said, one of the things that we learned, and this was when he was running campaigns in the '80s, he said one of the things that we learned is like getting our message out there through the voice of the constituents or the voters was actually the best thing that worked for us. That helped, underperforming, no-name politicians really kind of get elected. He's like, it wasn't the politician saying it; it was someone else saying saying this is a good idea and this came from this politician. So this idea of like that word of mouth earned media can only come through actually doing interesting things is the point.
Absolutely. And having people take notice. And I think too, like there's this element of social proof that comes along with it. Right. And so that's what the team leader should be doing. The team leader should be running the team, creating the culture, the impact, the things that are going to get the name of that team, authority, trust levels, relationships out there. Which is going to be, even with the earned media stuff that I was just talking about, that can also be used really effectively in paid traffic. Something like that can work for you forever.
Yeah, what you're describing is sort of amplifying those sort of messages that work through paid media. I remember listening to the guy who was one of the chief growth roles at Square. And he said, when people tell me, because he gave this really wonderful talk, you guys should look this up. It's on YouTube. Just look for Growth Square. Just Google that. We'll find it. We'll drop it in the chat in the live stream. So I won't have you guys go on Google and try to find it on YouTube. But what he said was people would come to him and brag about, all of our traffic is organic. All of our traffic is word of mouth. We get all these referrals. He's like, are you a moron? He's like, you're already getting all this momentum. Like, why aren't you putting advertising and throwing gasoline in the fire? He's like, you're crazy. Like that's not impressive. That is just reckless. And he's right. It is reckless to have, if you've got something that people are already talking about, flame the fire, right? Get people out there helping spread the word, which you can do through obviously paid advertising. So I'm writing this down because I'm trying to visualize this in my own mind. You've got the team lead, you've got the sort of, offense and defense, right? The listing agent who can also service buyers and vice versa. You got the project manager. That's working. How far? Let's say you've got 3 buyer agents and listing agents. You got 1 team lead and you got 1 project manager. How far can these individuals go? At what point do you need to hire somebody else? Is it more of those sort of offensive defensive players? Is it more project managers? Like
it really, yeah. So it really depends on what the lifestyle that the listing agent or the lead agent is looking to have.
Okay.
Right. There are those agents who just want to be in production. That's what they want. They love it. They still want to be selling.
Okay.
But then I also talk to agents who are like, no, I want to run my business from the beach. Like, I don't want to have to be, selling homes. I don't want to be it's funny. We always talk about this. I don't want to be taking my shoes off every day in and out of houses. Right. Which I also get. And so what you can do is, as a visionary, once you have the operations in place, I would also add in eventually a marketing person. I think that you also, once you grow to a certain size, you do need to make sure that you have someone who is able to handle the marketing stuff, whether it's organic, whether it's paid, whether it's earned, and can actually like go out and make those connections from a media standpoint as well. But it really depends. If that person doesn't want to be in production anymore, that operations manager with a marketing person can still run the whole business with that lead person just literally being the face of the business. So that's why I always say, like, bring in that operations person before you get to a point where you want to leave, because what it does if you wait too long is the business itself will either grow too big that the people who you have in place will not follow suit, or what ends up happening is things kind of will crash before, because you don't have proper systems and operations in place.
Yeah, and I think about this idea of not having proper systems and automation in place, and I want to transition and talk specifically about marketing for a moment, because I think our audience, is wanting to know where the puck is going. They want to I want you to first maybe give, because I want you to give me first your sort of just your philosophical view of marketing, the role of marketing, how to do marketing well in 2020 and beyond. And then I want to talk about, where is Jess making big investments? Where are you coaching your clients in your community to sort of spend their time and energy on? Because I think that's where you and I are very much in alignment, where the traditional means of marketing and advertising that have been, promoted and advertised and coached in real estate are run in complete contrast to everything that we're seeing as it relates to the consumer experience. So why don't we start with this? Start with your marketing philosophy, and then we'll talk about the bets you're making in 2020 and beyond, and what you're coaching your clients on.
Okay. So I want to preface this really quickly with the fact that I am not the normal, and I've never been the normal realtor. When I got my license, I was 21. And I went to the training that told me to door knock and cold call and send flyers and farm neighborhoods. And I thought, if I have to do this, this business is not for me. I am a textbook introvert. I want to hide on my couch with my cat under the covers. Like, that's me, right? I'm not going to go knock on people's doors and ask them if they want to buy some knives.
Yeah.
Let's, and so I actually grew my initial business, wasn't with Sphere, because my mom's been an agent for 20 years at that point. So I grew, there was this brand new thing out there called Facebook. I'm going to date myself there. And Facebook didn't have marketplace, but it had a classifieds area at the time. So that's how I built my business. Going into the classified section, messaging people, giving them value, and talking about what it is that they could do when I saw that they were looking for something real estate related. So that's how I initially built my business. And at the time it worked really well, but now obviously that wouldn't work now. But so my marketing philosophy is create relationships at scale. This is a relationship-based business. People don't want to be treated like leads. And I think that that's the first mistake that people make in real estate, is they throw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and they want to see what sticks. And it's the people who win in digital marketing, the people who win in marketing period are the people who treat people like people. And so this is a human to human business. So the three different buckets that we kind of work that we use, and I'm sure you've seen this already, we use the three pieces of marketing, which is relevancy, omnipresence, and intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
So relevancy being your marketing message, basically what you're saying to your leads to attract them into your world and convince them that they have something that they need your help with.
Yep.
Right? Omnipresence is basically the strategic distribution of that marketing message.
Mm-hmm.
So using retargeting and showing your best content to your leads via organic dissemination, paid advertising, so that they're seeing you on a daily basis.
Yeah.
We want those people, those prospects, to feel like you're everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's basically about focusing on smaller groups and going deeper rather than wider. So finding those relevant people, creating those, using psychology and creating that relationship at scale,
Mm-hmm.
so that you're building your audience and you're building your network of people who know, like, and trust you.
Yep.
Then intimacy is basically going to be the human element of your marketing. It's about showing up for your audience, being transparent and authentic in your content, spending time to build relationships with that audience. It's really about connection on a human level and creating community around your brand.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Well, I'm taking notes ferociously here on my side of things.
Okay.
And when you say relevancy, I say my translation is the adding value, so that you're worth listening to. When you say omnipresence, I think of reach, and when you say intimacy, I think of personalization.
Absolutely.
And I think your words are better than mine, to be clear. But what you're saying is so absolutely true, because one of the things that I coach our clients on at Curator is treat every lead like they're your only customer.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, if you start to do that, then they will become your customer. And this idea that somehow you can drip on people, Joe said this to me earlier today. Joe, my brother, who I made fun of earlier, so I'll give him some props for the show. He said, dripping is a cute name for spamming. And he's right. Dripping on people in the context of or irrelevant, unsegmented, not properly timed. Like, if someone subscribes to your newsletter and you put them on a drip campaign that educates them about what you do, that's different than just simply sending people information without any regard to whether or not they want to receive it. Twilio put out a guide recently, Jess, on this. I just saw it today in my Facebook feed. It was about like the consumer behavior trends. What do consumers hate? And the like number 1, 2, and 3 thing was irrelevant content, too much of it, and not personalized to their needs. Like that. So what you're basically saying is, like, solve those problems first, and then your marketing becomes a little bit easier. How does one go about addressing scale? Because I think this is the big lie that marketing companies have been saying for a long time, which is they say it's more equals scale, right? They say get more leads, send more emails. All of that is going to equate to scale. But you said something really interesting. You said scaling relationships. And I want you to go a little bit deeper on that for me, if you could. Like, what does that actually mean to scale relationships?
Yeah, so we use very systematic, like a psychological journey when we're using anything, whether it's a guide asset, whether it's like the content that we're putting in front of people. We use 9 different content types to actually facilitate that psychological journey through the retargeting. We don't use email as much as we used to, just because the email open rates in the real estate industry have dropped so low. So we are using messenger campaigns. We have to be very careful with them, because they have to be relevant.
Yeah.
And they have to be value first. So, but the open rates for messenger campaigns are 90%.
Yeah.
So that's really what we're doing, is we're working the numbers to make sure that we're, like I said before, going deeper rather than wider. We're not carpet bombing people with some irrelevant marketing. We're finding certain segments of people, focusing on that demographic, creating relevant, niche specific, demographic specific content that is going to be valuable for those people, and then using psychology to build that relationship at scale. So what I mean by that is mimic the growth of a real human relationship. We're just doing it online and at scale.
When I hear you say mimic the growth of a real human relationship, what I'm hearing you say is, when you meet someone for the first time, you don't can tell them that you love them. It's
No.
going to skip. You don't tell them that they're the only person you ever want to work with, right?
Yeah.
What you're saying is there's a sort of like, let me prove to you that I'm worth paying attention to, and let's
Mhm.
build a relationship over time, which is how every relationship has ever been built in the history of man. Like,
Yep.
I fell in love with my wife right away. She definitely didn't fall in love with me right away.
I
So
fell in love with my husband. It was not the same way.
yeah, so like but what you're getting at is like I think this is the point is like we have an expression curator date before you get married, and
Yep.
that's what generally you need to do online is figure out a way like let me prove that I'm actually of value to you, and then we can maybe schedule a call and maybe we can get together at a coffee shop. Like I find that a lot of the CTAs or calls to actions or a lot of the sort of right hooks that you send in emails are like let's talk right now.
Yeah.
Let's chat, and that's like way too early in the
They're not
process.
ready.
Yeah, they're not ready. What like get in the mind of the consumer right now? What is a consumer in 2020 looking for in their realtor? Someone to help represent them. What are they looking for? What are the characteristics of a successful winning realtor that's going to attract business?
So I would say really deep understanding of the problems that they're solving.
Mm-hmm.
So no more of this like we use the same process for people who are upsizing, downsizing, first time buyers, like seniors. You have to have systems and processes and specific solutions for each segment of the market,
Yeah.
right? So it's customization.
Mm-hmm.
It's the upsizer has very different issues than the downsizer, right? And then also understanding, and I think this is from a mindset perspective something that people forget, people don't move because it's fun.
Yeah.
Moving is awful.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason behind the move itself is that something in their current situation is not serving them.
Mm.
And so they're looking to solve that problem with a move.
Mm-hmm.
And you are the bridge between the current situation and the desired situation. And so a really deep understanding of that person, that situation, why they're doing what they're doing, and building that trust. Because at the end of the day, there is no one out there who doesn't know another realtor.
Yeah. That's done very there's lots we just wrote a book exactly what to say for real estate agents and we talk about how to do that discovery through a one-to-one conversation, which
Mhm.
is you're like face to face, you're on the phone. It's a little easier to guide them through that process. How does one go about doing that at scale with marketing? How does one
Market
go
research.
about like that process of like, finding out what they're really interested in? What's your
Yeah.
approach there?
Market research.
Okay.
So first of all, what we do is we segment down what like who is the target,
Mhm.
then getting to know them on a deeper level through market research, pains, problems, fears, desires.
Mhm.
And then from there we actually map the message of how I said earlier, like mimic the growth of a real human relationship.
Yeah.
In the beginning, nobody cares what any of us have to say
Mhm.
if they don't think that we know what we're talking about.
Mhm.
So the first thing that we need to do is actually position you as an authority and get that initial attention so that you're not just being filtered out as noise.
Mhm.
So we have to position you as an authority before, just like you said before, a date before you get married, before you add in the personal beliefs, personal philosophy, personal story content.
Yeah.
Because people don't want to hear your deepest, darkest. They don't want the authenticity, the vulnerability stuff until they already see you as an expert or as an authority.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think about this idea of Google had this recent study. I think it was done by one of these SEO companies like Moz, where they said like they were analyzing the click through rate of results on Google, and one of the things that they uncovered was the placement. Whereas that was a factor, it was a big factor, right? Number one gets more clicks than number two, number three. The X factor was the association the individual had with the brand. Meaning, if I Googled, let's say, how to get more listings, and I saw Jess from Listing Lab, and I saw some guy who I never met before, don't know who it is, and I saw some other person who I already know, but I know their stuff is sort of dated and
Mhm.
recycled. You could be number five on the page. I'm still clicking on you.
Yeah,
So what I hear you saying about sort of that authority piece, building a brand that is synonymous or associated with authority is one of the first steps into getting your message that you're trying to get out there to the world actually heard.
absolutely. And it all comes down to psychology
Hmm.
at the end of the day. Marketing is just psychology. And so I'm talking everything from the colors that you use,
Yeah.
the font that you use, the visual branding, the brand story.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the time what ends up happening is the agent will put out spend 5 minutes because their brokerage asked them to write some vanilla bio. I went to this school, I graduated, I got my real estate license, I have 3 kids and a dog.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's not the story that's going to be compelling and that's going to draw those people into you to think, you know what, this is my person.
Yeah.
I've hired mentors before that literally I read the story, their personal story on their website and booked a call. No idea what they did. And I was like, this person resonates with me. I need to talk to them.
Yeah, what you're talking about, we have a chance. I've been open about this in the show. We had the opportunity, and we were working with a Curator 1000-watt consulting to help us go through the process of helping us shape our worldview. We've been in this business for now a little over 7 years, and we have, to a large degree, have mirrored our customers grow, and then at the same time, like, okay, we got to slow down for a second to figure out who we are. And going through this exercise with the team at 1000-watt, I was just in Portland. I did a discovery meeting with them all day long. I will say, like, the deeply thinking about your worldview, how you want everyone to perceive you, is so torturous and difficult. And like, you feel like you're like, for people like me, want to keep going. But what happens is, at the end of that process, you have this deep sense of relief that now that I know who I am, I know what to do. And that's what I hear you saying a lot of, is when you sort of are thinking about the psychology, is like, if someone can clearly understand who you are by what you're putting out there to the world. I remember I was in London with my wife, I think like 18 months ago, and I went to this steak restaurant, and it's called like Hawthorne's, and it was in like Covent Gardens in London, and it was just unbelievable, right? Took us a while to get in there. We got there, we sat down, and I got the menu. And I opened up the menu. It's got like 100 different like steaks on it. And I saw this like special steak. It was kind of like in the middle of the menu. And the copy on the steak was like, it was a burger actually. It's like, we crafted this burger. It had like 3 blends of meat in it. And then it had this line that said, it really shouldn't have taken us this long to figure out how to make the perfect burger, but it did. Like, they had this like really kind of clever, cute line, like self-deprecating, like, why did it take a steakhouse 6 years to figure out how to make a burger? But it did. And like, you saw that, and the copy, the messaging was like, okay, I got to get that, right? So that's what I'm hearing you say, is like, if you get rid of the generic stuff and really kind of get to the root of who you are, people will connect with that, the right people for that matter.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of perfectionism that shows up in real estate businesses, where people don't want to be seen as human. And they, it's the perfect headshot with like their arms crossed, leaning against a wall. And
I got that headshot. It's slowly around. They never use it on our promos. They only use like the one with me like looking totally in the distance. But
yeah, that totally wasn't a dig on you. But I just mean, like, this image that's unrelatable.
Sure.
Right. And when people are selling something as personal as a property, they want to feel like this other person is more than just a business.
Yeah.
And when you actually allow yourself to be imperfect and to show to talk about real things, show real things, obviously, and I say this all the time to people who we work with, don't show your mess before you've cleaned it up. Nobody wants to be working with a basket case. but at the end of the day, like, you can, if you show your journey, you tell your story in a real way, in an authentic way, in a vulnerable way, people will connect with that far more than they'll connect with some, like I'm just going to use like the Lenouvel team with this perfect image, airbrushed, like, and just a tagline. It's not enough anymore. It gets filtered out as just another agent who's just going to try to sell me something.
Yeah, I think and there's plenty of those, and they have. I think, and what I tell our customers is that, in the absence of brand, the consumer is going to choose the cheapest and most convenient option.
100%.
That's all. So if you cannot in some way, shape, or form articulate or position yourself as someone who's going to add value to their life more than someone else, they're going to go with what they know, what's familiar to them. That's why they're going to hire their nephew who just got their license. That's why they're going to use the agent they used before, because change is risky. So you've got to compel them through that process. Let me ask you one last question, Jess. And just real quickly, before I ask the last question, because I think it's a big question, I think our audience is going to want to know your answer to it. Where can people connect with you online? Where's the best place to follow Jess Lenouvel? Where should people stalk you? Like, where's all the resources that we're coaching today? Where can they find that information?
Yeah, so I think on the screen below, it just says at Jess Lenouvel. That is where you can find me on Instagram.
Okay.
But honestly, the best place where I like to connect with people is my Facebook group. It's just called the Listings Lab Method for Real Estate Agents. I'm in there every day. There's all kinds of assets and free trainings and all kinds of stuff that I throw in there.
Very cool. And we'll drop that in the chat, but it's
Perfect.
the Facebook group, the Listing Lab Method on Facebook.
Yep, the Listings Lab Method for Real Estate Agents.
Got it. We'll track that down. We'll drop it in the chat for our audience, and we'll include that when we send out the replay for our fans here. Last question for you, Jess. And again, this has been so much fun for me, and I know our audience is getting a tremendous amount of value out of this. And it's always fun to find someone out there who's sort of preaching the gospel of how to do things the right way. So for me, it's been a real pleasure. Where are you making big investments in 2020? If you think about the past being defined by, let's say, just to give our audience some context, the advent of technology or the advent of marketing online started primarily with, Google. I'm only going to go back 15 years here. Google, and then Craigslist kind of became a real big player in the space. And then social came on the scene, and then Facebook obviously began to dominate. We started running ads on Facebook. That started to become a little bit more challenging, a little bit more difficult, a little bit more complex, a little bit more restrictive. Then obviously IG became sort of the new hot playground for us. And now we're at this point where, and all along the while, video has always been sort of this like silent killer of marketing, right? Yeah. Where is Jess making big bets on in 2020?
So I'm still focused on Facebook and Instagram. I think Instagram is, especially for that younger demographic, and it's not as young as it was,
sure,
right? So those move up buyers, those upsizers, those people who are having kids now, that's a really great platform for that. But you can't just throw a bunch of stuff on Instagram and expect it to convert. You have to show up. It is a platform that needs to be nurtured. I would say the other place is Facebook groups. Facebook is pushing groups like crazy.
They are, yeah.
Community-based groups. I've spent a lot of time and effort growing my Facebook group in the last year. The other thing that we're also is just anywhere where we can create a larger audience. Messenger audiences as well still count. So anywhere where we can actually grow an engaged audience.
Yeah.
And I think like we want to make sure, and it's the same thing that people say to me all the time. I have an email list of 10,000 people. I'm like, great. What's your open rate? 5%. Great. You have an email list that is actually 5% of 10,000 people.
Yeah.
Because that's the only people that you're actually getting in front of. So the focus is always going to be, where can we get more relevant eyes on the relevant content?
Yeah. And my head, when I hear you say that, goes, what you're saying is become the New York Times, not BuzzFeed. Build an audience, not traffic. Invest in Instagram. You're doubling down on Instagram, on Facebook, on groups, on building connections at scale. Jess from the Listing Lab Method, thank you for being on the Water Cooler show about marketing, sales, technology. Each episode, we focus on bringing you advice that works. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.